and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell, and today we are talking about essentially wanting to be all things to all people, in particular for you nonfiction authors. And it's real, I don't even really know where to start with this, because it's really become kind of an issue where, in particular, nonfiction authors want to appeal to every single market demographic out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We do hear that a lot when authors come to us with nonfiction titles, and we get it. You know, if you have something to say and you have knowledge to share and experience to share, I understand where that comes from. You know, you imagine that what you have to say or what you have to share can work for so many different kinds of people.
Yeah.
But that's so hard to do with an actual marketing strategy, especially, you know, online. With how much is done online now, you have to be much more concise and much more specific.
Well, but the other piece of it, though, too, is that we kind of live in a world now where everybody needs to be invited to the party, right? But some parties aren't really right for everybody. And books are kind of the same way. I think personally that and I actually, let me just say, by full disclosure, I kind of did this with my very first book. So a million years ago, I wrote a book called Get Published Today. And the first book I wrote for everybody who has a book in them, right? But essentially, Get Published Today was really about the growth of the indie publishing market, which at the time, print on demand, was a very new way of publishing. Okay. So I said, this book is going to be for everybody who wants to publish. What I misunderstood about the market is that there are a lot of authors out there who really do want to get a traditional publisher. And look, 22 years ago, that we had more publishers and more literary agents, and there were a lot more opportunities for authors to get a traditional publishing agreement. This book was very specific to the independent publishing market, which at the time we sort of had, but we did not to the degree that we do now. So the first time that I put that book out there, it really did not do well. I mean, I did a lot of speaking around it because there were a lot of authors who were really interested. And as I got out onto the conference circuit, I realized that the market for this book, while it's not necessarily a niche market, is very specific. So when I re-released the book, I was very clear on who this book was for, what it was about, and I got away from appealing to every single person who had a book in them, which was essentially wrong because the book didn't appeal to all those people.
That's a very good point. I like that example. See, Penny actually lives it, you guys.
That was a painful lesson because I was like, this is just going to be awesome. But I think the piece of it too, and Amy has talked about this before, is that nobody wants, the Get Published Today example is probably not the best example to lead into this, but when you have a nonfiction book and you say that the book is for everybody, you really have to ask yourself, is it really for everybody? Because nobody wants leftovers or to feel like an afterthought. People really we want things the way that we want them, right? Most people, if you go into Starbucks, don't just order a regular cup of coffee. Their requests are sometimes even confusing for the baristas. We want things the way that we want them, and we want books that appeal to our specific needs. And I think that's really at the heart of it. Trying to make nonfiction too inclusive is where authors kind of stumble.
Absolutely. You know, consumers are much smarter than some authors give them credit for, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why we wanted to talk about this, because typically when somebody writes a book, they don't necessarily write it for everyone. They write about what they know, right, Penny?
Yeah.
They write about their area of expertise. They write about what they learned from their experience, something like that. So there is something very specific that drives the writing and creation and production of that book. But then when it's time to decide who to market it to, who to sell it to, who can use it, that's when they kind of, the snowball effect of like, well, everybody can use this. Like it's, I went through something that everybody can learn from. But the reality is that you just can't throw it at everybody. This one packaged item isn't going to work for everybody in the same way. And that's where strategic branding comes in. There are ways to reuse your ideas, and it doesn't even have to be that dramatic. The changes don't have to be that dramatic, but you really have to repackage your ideas in ways that make people feel like you understand their situation, their needs, their goals, and different demographics are going to have different variations of that. And like Penny said, if you just try to say like, no, this will work for everybody, their immediate reaction, the psychology behind that as a buyer is that like, well, they're obviously not paying attention to what I really need.
Yeah, exactly. And, you may say that, well, but then at least I've sold a book. So I've had authors say to me, well, but at least I sold a book. Absolutely. You have sold one book to that person who will never buy another book from you again. 95% of books are sold word of mouth. So, conversely, if you had sold this book to somebody who was like, oh my gosh, this book was written for me, I love this book, I'm telling, 50 people, or I'm posting it on social media, and that's a much better driver for book sales. Let me give you an example of something. So a bunch of years ago, I talked to this author, and she wrote a book about selling your first home. Right. And that's not the exact title, but she wrote a book called, that was about selling your first home. And she really wanted this book to appeal to everybody. But selling your first home or buying your first home, right? Those are different. Everybody, like your needs, if you are a single woman, are going to be different than if you are a young family, or than if you are if you are retiring. Why are you selling this home? Are you moving to Florida? Are you moving? You know what I mean? Are you downsizing? What are you doing? So what she did is she rewrote the book. Well, she didn't actually even rewrote it. She added sections that would appeal to the different market demographics. So selling your first home, or again, buying your first home, because I think she did both, for Christians, for singles, for newly married couples, for young families, for retirees, and on and on and on and on and on. So she created this kind of empire of books that were catering to these specific markets that had these specific needs. And she had been in the real estate market long enough to know exactly what they were and to pinpoint it. And the books actually did very, very well for her. They didn't require a lot of changes, because there are, if you've ever bought or sold a home, obviously it varies from state to state, but there are specific things that never change. But then there are variables that she addressed in this book and did so brilliantly. And, if you look at, like, for example, the chicken soup empire, right? So sometimes people laugh and they say, well, there's chicken soup for everything. Well, there's a reason for that. There's chicken soup for the equestrian soul, chicken soup for, the bird lover's soul, chicken soup for the plant. I mean, maybe he's laughing because we have this obsession with birds here. The plant lover soul. I mean, whatever that is, right? Chicken soup for new moms. What they did was build an empire by creating books that met individual needs, as opposed to saying, here's one chicken soup book, enjoy it, hope you find something in there that you like. They really zeroed in and catered to these different market demographics. And when you think of the chicken soup brand, I mean, I only have to say chicken soup, and people probably aren't thinking of Campbell's. They're thinking of the books, because they're just that big.
Absolutely. Oh, I agree. It's kind of like the love languages brand.
Yes.
Too.
Yes.
They've done love languages for everything. Yes. Dave Ramsey, love him, hate him, whatever. He's also made a ton of money on repurposing essentially his methods, his approach to personal finance. But as you said, he managed to find ways to tailor it to specific markets. So they really felt like their needs were being met. Because if you're expecting your readers to put in the extra effort to fit themselves into your mold, that's not going to happen.
Absolutely.
Yes. You really need to rebrand appropriately. And like Penny said, it's a few chapters here or there. Maybe you change up the intro a little bit. You can also, your covers, for example, you have to think about that as well, like different cover imagery and different approaches to how your book is sold and how it appears to the market can be very different depending on the demographic. And then, there's also pitching in media, right, Penny?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that the more that you can zero in on the specific needs of your market. And I'm not necessarily suggesting everybody that has nonfiction listening to this podcast is like, oh my gosh, now I have to create 20 different editions of my book. That's not at all what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is find a market. So Dan Poynter, who is a publishing guru and died a bunch of years ago, talked about it as the pond, right? Own the pond that you're in, but don't try to borrow somebody else's pond. And that's where a lot of times, right, authors trying to be too inclusive come in. I mean, we see this in children's books. We see this in all kinds of variables where they say this. I mean, Amy, you cited an example one time where somebody told you that a children's book would work for a 2-year-old as well as 12-year-old.
Right. Their age range was 2 to 12. And it's like, I don't know if you have kids, but my 9-year-old wouldn't be interested in a book that was written for a 2-year-old. So you're overreaching and you're not making any sales at that point because those parents do not feel like you really get what they're looking for.
Right. Exactly. And to the media point, which I got a little bit sidetracked. I know how shocking that I got sidetracked. To the media point about going after specific opportunities, you will have much more success the more focused, the more you zero in on exactly who your market is. Again, a lot of times books that are too general in their approach also have pitches that tend to be very general. And yes, in some cases that can work, but most of the time the media isn't going to find that very interesting. So it's also too just about zeroing in on who actually is your market.
Yeah, and, absolutely.
Being very focused. And because it is going to change up it's going to change up your cover. Mm-hmm. It's going to, it's going to impact absolutely everything that has to do with your book when you aren't trying to be, all things to all people.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to think about it this way. When you are pitching either a thought leader, whether it's online or you're pitching a major news publication or a lifestyle magazine, they all have demographics, even if the ones that seem like their general audience, I guarantee you they pay attention to their demographics.
Yeah.
And so if you give them a general pitch, my book is for everybody, they're going to go, okay, well, our people isn't everybody, and they will immediately move on. And so that also goes along with your competition. Can y'all hear our sound tech?
Our sound team is speaking. They have some input. Maybe we should.
I apologize. They're not awesome at their
apologize.
job.
I love it when we hear from them.
I know. But you have more competition than you realize also, so saying your book is for everyone might sound like a great way to pull in extra sales. But the reality is you have competition that are topping the charts that are taking a much more direct approach, saying they're for a specific audience, so people are drawn to resources that they resonate with. And it's hard to achieve that if you just think you can make everybody happy. So if you look at what's topping the charts, if you look at the bestsellers, I guarantee they are not necessarily saying they're for everybody. They have figured out who their market is, and they tailor their marketing, their messaging, all of that to that market. So to Penny's point earlier, we're not saying that if you wrote nonfiction, now you have to go out and make 10 other versions, but we are saying that if you feel very strongly that you have the knowledge, the tips, the recommendations, the experience that is applicable to many different market demographics, and you want to capitalize on that, you will have to create different products for those market demographics if you really want to be successful doing that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that if you're listening to this and you think, oh, I wonder if that's been, if that's kind of been my issue. One of the things that I did with Get Published Today was I completely repackaged that book. So I repackaged it and I re-released it. Now, if the idea, like the real estate author that I mentioned, if that has sparked some ideas, you think, oh my gosh, I could create custom editions. You could most definitely repackage your books for different audiences that you feel that you have a real chance with. I mean, I'm in the middle of rewriting How to Sell Books by the Truckload. And I'm going to say this and Amy's probably going to scream, but I've been thinking about, maybe it's time to create How to Sell Books by the Truckload for fiction authors and How to Sell Books by the Truckload for nonfiction. Because if you're reading through these, so the more custom these books get, the more you feel like, okay, this book is exactly for me. Because I imagine as they're reading through, if you've picked up the book, you know what I'm talking about. As you're reading through this and you're like, okay, well, this is the fiction chapter. I guess, should I skip it? Should I leave? Should I read it? I don't know if there's something she's going to say something in here that could impact me. Right. It's really just about also saving your reader some time and getting to the heart and getting to the point. So creating covers for each audience, repackaging the books for different audiences, if you feel like you have the opportunity to do that with your book.
Right. And I kind of touched on intros earlier. That's a really simple way to make sure, Penny, you wrote about this recently about, the first lines of your book, the first lines of your book description, how important that very first few minutes essentially are, with your reader. So it's amazing what you can accomplish by customizing at minimum the introduction. So the person feels like you really understand why they picked up your book and who they are. And Penny, you mentioned examples. I think that was brilliant. The woman with the real estate books, making sure that she went in and any examples or situations that you kind of use in your book to set up, what you have to say, make sure that those really read appropriately for that specific market that you're looking to go after with that edition of your book. That makes such a huge difference.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. I think that the examples that you cite in your nonfiction book can absolutely make or break the book. For sure. And I've actually had people read through my books and make suggestions. And this is why on previous podcasts, I said, listen, if you've read Truckload, because I'm in the middle of revising it and you have some suggestions, send them my way. But the examples that you cite are really important because they need to resonate with your reader.
Absolutely.
I think also, after the book is published, creating targeted blurbs, elevator pitches. We're going to do a show on elevator pitches. We've had a call out for your elevator pitch and descriptions for each market. And, it's interesting because we talk a lot about your Amazon book page and creating a great write-up. And this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? If somebody reads the book description on Amazon and said, oh my gosh, this book is for me, I can almost guarantee you they are probably going to know 5 or 10 other people that the book would resonate with. So it's not about excluding people, but it's really about broadening, your market in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last part, at least that I want to touch on, because I know this gets very tricky for authors and I get it, what to do about your website and your online platform, even social media accounts. Penny, when you have different demographics, it's like, which ones can all live together harmoniously? And when do you have to cut the cord and create essentially a separate, sort of platform? A lot of times, if you're sticking to the same topic, but you have different editions for different demographics, but say, like we've used a few different examples, whether it's real estate or personal finance, as long as you're really sticking to the same core topic, I think it's safe to say that you can easily manage all of those with a single website. It really depends on, I think, social media. I would chat with somebody. I would encourage you to get coaching and do some consulting about what the best, because I don't think that's as simple, to say one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I think with the website, this just enhances the experience for your different markets. Consider doing a drop-down menu for your books, for your different editions. I think that's a great way to handle it. So personal finance for couples, personal finance for young families, for retirees, whatever it is, give them their own dedicated page for that book on your website. And again, that's just another opportunity to really customize and personalize that demographics experience with your brand by giving them a page that is really dedicated to calling out, the fact that you understand their needs, their goals, what they're looking for, how you can help them, things like that. So don't miss out on that website opportunity as well to further refine, your different markets and how you can potentially sell to different people in a really effective way.
Yeah, because I think that there's a book that we worked with a bunch of years ago called Riches in the Niches, actually. I know it's pronounced a couple different ways. The whole premise of the book was that the more that you can narrow your focus, the more that you can zero in on the needs of the market, the better that you will do, the better that your book will do, the better that your career will do. And anything that if you look at like the big brands that are out there, all of them cater to specific needs, and they don't deviate from that. And that's really where the success is. So if you want to, because we have a really, really great wedding book that we're working with right now. And the author wanted to put this wedding book out there on Amazon so that it was also for, gay couples and heterosexual couples and kind of all the things. But each of these market pockets, they all have different needs. So as opposed to creating something that felt a little bit too general I want to be all the things, creating offshoots of that really speak to those individual demographics, that's really where the gold is. And as we talked about, it creates in many times, when you think about it, like, oh my gosh, it sounds so much work. I have to create all these different editions. But really, honestly, the tweaks in many cases can be very minor, but can feel really impactful to your reader.
I think that's such a smart move too, Penny. And I think a lot of you who haven't done this but are considering it will be surprised at how much, and here's my rah moment, but how motivated you're going to feel by flexing those muscles of knowledge that you have and coming up with the additional pieces that you can add for different markets. Because if you're really an expert in this topic, or you've really gone through it and you really have knowledge and information to share, then I guarantee it's in you, so it's really tapping into and making the most of what you have to offer. Also think of it that way, not as additional work necessarily, but as really making sure you're maximizing on everything you have to say to different kinds of demographics and different kinds of situations, because that's what really makes a topic expert, or a thought leader.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And, I hope that this show has been helpful. We don't often do shows specific to either fiction or nonfiction. We're going to take a little bit of our own advice and definitely start doing more of them. But we love your show ideas. So we'd love to know what you would like to hear more of, as well as we love reviews wherever you listen to podcasts. And as I mentioned, I am revising How to Sell Books by the Truckload on Amazon. Would love your ideas. If you've read the book, hopefully you have. Love to know what you'd like to see more of, less of, or what you maybe want included that I didn't do. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.